Hello, and welcome to the Culture Beats podcast, featuring conversations about pop culture and many other aspects of life. I'm your host, Chris Bournet. In this episode, I speak with multi-talented writer, designer, and publisher Victor Dandridge about the challenges and rewards of being an independent creative. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Well, Victor, thanks again for making the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. When I
Yeah.
got the message, I was like, I am absolutely going to do this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know we both are alums of Fort Hayes. I went to actually the Career Center for Radio and
hmm
TV. Did you go to the like high school part of it or?
I did both, actually.
Okay,
So I
okay.
did the high school, and I was recruited for the commercial art program my sophomore year of high school. So um, kind of, was trying to do the whole art thing all across the board. And visual art has always been my medium. It actually got me in trouble, actually, because in middle school, I was a part of choir. And so my choir teacher thought that I was going there for singing. And when she found out that I did not go out for choir at all, she was very cross at me. Like
Oh,
she found me.
wow.
She actually talked to um, our former choir teacher, and I got hemmed up kind of in the hallway, like, "How come you didn't join choir?" And I was like, "Well, I'm here to draw." And they're like, "What? You do art?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I'm here." It was very funny.
So you're what they call a polymath, someone with many different talents. So is music or singing, is that still a passion of yours or?
I love music. My mother was a musician, and so I grew up with music. And I do think that there is an aspect of storytelling that is inherent within music that I picked up at a young age. But it's not necessarily the key of what I do anymore. But I will say that the the experience of music, specifically in middle school, is actually like key to my career now when I'm interviewing people on stage at comic conventions. So it's kind of an interesting through line where I broke that sense of being scared of talking in front of people because of music. My seventh grade year, I had to do a solo, and you're talking about a very pivotal time where body's changing, your interest in girls is changing, and all of a sudden I'm doing something super embarrassing and was able to step into it. And because of that, all fear of public speaking and all that stuff just died. So it still kind of carries, just maybe not in the most like linear fashion.
That's awesome. I've never heard of like music as being sort of like a cure for not cure or maybe a way to manage stage fright because a lot of musicians seem like they have stage fright throughout their entire lives. So
Yeah.
I guess it's like it varies from person to person. Like some people they grow out of it like you, it seemed like, and then other people like I've heard even Barbara Streisand say the reason that she never toured very much is
hmm
because she does not like performing in front of, even if it's a small group in an intimate
Right.
setting. She doesn't
Which
like
is
being in
wild
front of people. Yeah, yeah. You think
because you're
somebody
like, you're
who,
Barbara Streisand. Like, what do you mean?
yeah, yeah, someone who's naturally gifted, but yeah.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I digress, but your LinkedIn profile says that you're a
hmm
writer, a publisher, a moderator, and a host, and sounds like that's just a few of the titles. So how do you navigate between all those titles and
That's a
manage
great
those different
question.
identities?
So it all kind of gets encapsulated under this moniker, the hardest working man in comics. And they kind of came out again, a little bit of music there because James Brown.
Yeah.
But where it came from was I was a kid that didn't like to read. And as I've gotten older, and to be a little bit more specific, it's not that I didn't like to read. The things that I wanted to read weren't validated. So whether that was comics, whether that was Goosebumps books, they weren't things that were being celebrated as an act of reading or true literature when I was growing up. And so I didn't necessarily have any sort of difficulties, but I did have reluctance in terms of reading. Um, all of that changed when they announced on the news that Superman is going to die. As a kid born in the 80s, I was all about pop culture, the movies of the 80s, Superman and all the different, sequels that it had. I was locked in for that. And so when you have something like the death of Superman, this huge story arc that, is big enough that it gets announced on the news, I admitted that I wanted to read it. And my mom like immediately locked in on that fact. And she worked at City Center at the time. Big shout out to City Center for those that don't remember what
Yeah, I
that
missed
is.
it. Yeah.
I said, oh God, it was
Yeah.
my place. I loved it.
Yeah, for the listeners, it was a mall in our city down in downtown Columbus, Ohio.
Yes,
That's no
yes, it
longer
was
in
beautiful.
existence. Yeah.
No, not anymore. But attached to it was a Lazarus, and on the Lazarus, the fifth floor of Lazarus, there was a comic shop. And so my mom came home the next day with a stack of comics and was like, "Here, read these." And I was hooked. It kind of like changed everything for me. Like in terms of being a kid who was interested in science, like that was my statement. When I grew up, I want to be a scientist. I had no real meaning behind that. It was just this concept of creating something is what I really wanted to do. And as I got older, I realized that um, the science wasn't the creativity part. It was creativity that I was always chasing. And in writing stories and things like that, I realized that I could create everything that I ever thought I wanted to and more. And so that kind of became kind of my path through middle school, into high school, and into college, where everything that I was doing was all about being a comic book artist. And what was interesting is like throughout all of that, I was coming up with stories, but the art was the part that really kind of was my goal. But once I got to college, I realized I didn't have the love for doing the visual art stuff as much as the writing. And that's kind of where my entire like trajectory shifted. And I started focusing specifically on writing. I wrote for a local independent publisher called Freestyle Comics that's still around today. One of my best good friends, Mike Watson, his flagship title, Hot Shot, I wrote the first 6.5 issues of. And there's this thing in comics. I'm not sure how familiar with comics you are, but
A little bit.
a little bit. Okay, good. So there's this thing where in comics, especially, even up to I would say the launch of the MCU, they weren't considered books. They weren't, regular reading material for so many people. And so when you talk about comics, there's this sort of like barrier or denial of how intrinsic, how deep, how philosophical, metaphorical, like comics can actually get. And I had written a script for Mike, and this is actually before I even had agreed to write the series. It was really supposed to be like a tutorial for him to write. And someone read it, like a young lady. And that again, at the time, ladies in comics was like a very like strange sort of thing. It was what we all wish we could see, but we didn't really get that opportunity to have, members of the opposite sex be interested in our geeky stuff. And she read my script and was like, "Oh my God, is this what comics are like? I want to read more of this." And getting that boost in my back about my skill as a writer encouraged someone to try comics for the first time. It kind of locked in for me, like that's what I need to be doing. Writing is really kind of my craft piece for comics. I can use the visual art skills that I've acquired to better write, but the actual drawing part doesn't interest me, and I'm not interested in being better at it. So I need to let that part go and focus on the thing that I'm really interested in.
That's really interesting. So it kind of sounds like visual art was kind of like a, for lack of a better term, gateway
Mm-hmm.
into writing. It's like you realize you wanted to be a storyteller, but not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily uh, apply yourself to the visual aspect of it, but more so the narrative part of it.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And I've been very fortunate that in the span of that time, I met a lot of visual artists that I could work with and build that kind of relationship with.
Wow. So what is kind of in your opinion the future of comics? Because it seems like graphic novels have become really popular. Like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying, like for a long time, people didn't recognize comics as books, but then graphic novels seemed like they really took off. And then with the whole Marvel and DC movies,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like more people than ever are discovering comics. But then, of course, there's the whole, I've heard there's a kind of decline in bricks and mortar comic book
Mm-hmm.
stores or even just regular bookstores that carry comics. It seems like they carry graphic novels, but not so much comic books. So is everything
Correct.
going digital, or in your opinion, like what is the future of comics?
Man, it's a huge question. Whether you knew it was that big or not, like it's huge because the industry is still trying to figure that out. In a lot of ways, what we're seeing are um, old institutions hitting their apex point where things have to change or they will die. And we had, back in the day, we had what we called the newsstand market, which is where you would find comics at random places, the drugstore, the gas station, the grocery store, things like that. And that kind of died out in favor of what we call the direct market. And the benefit was with the newsstand, there was no guarantee that you could get, sequential issues. Like it was very sporadic. With the direct market, there was, you were able to build collections, which was great. But in the process of how we set that up, we had false sales models where we would say a book sold out if it sold out from the distributor level, but never really paid attention to whether or not books sold to customers. And so we had, in the 90s, we had a major boom and bust where we had people that were buying books on speculation of their value. Oh, it's a new number one. It'll be worth, $1,000, $2,000, $100,000 one day. And because of that, we had people that were buying books that weren't readers, which is a big key piece. And because the market was just feeding that aspect without any sort of regulation, when things fell apart, Marvel almost went away through bankruptcy. Like they actually filed bankruptcy in the late 90s. So like all the MCU stuff that we've gotten over the last 20 years would not have happened. Like it was a very tedious sort of structure of business and industry. Right now, things are changing, like without question. And can I say that I can see a direct or specific place? Not so much. And that's kind of harrowing in a lot of ways. Comic shops are going away mostly because, in so many words, they're not they're not equipped to invite new people. We are overtly built on the backs of two major institutions, Marvel Comics and DC Comics. And when you do that, like if you look at just general bookstores, right? A general bookstore is not necessarily set up by publisher, even though there's what, like maybe five major publishers, but
Mhm.
you go to a bookstore, it's built by genre. And so you can find different, titles, authors of all sorts just in terms of discovery by being in the bookstore. Comic shops aren't built that way. They
Mhm.
are built to showcase Marvel comics or DC comics. So if you go to a Marvel section, if your interest is horror, you may not know that there's a particular Marvel comic that might, suit your interest there. And when that's the case, if there's a Image comic or a Boom Studios comic, it's not going to be in that same area. So you're not going to grab as much stuff, to keep that shop afloat. You may just go, well, this is too much. I don't have time to get into 60 years of publishing history, and I'm just not going to read it. So there's a lot of stuff that's changing in a way that aims to either account for that or replace it. Manga is a big one. The structure of manga is allowing for both bookstores to carry it better, for fans to get introduced to it better. It's volumized. The price point is way better. Your traditional average comic book is $4 on average. Your average manga book is 10. And yes, 10 is bigger than four, but you're getting a lot more content for $10 than you are for $4. And that stuff matters. So we're in a place where comics are going to change in a real big way. Me personally, I think that we need to shrink our efforts more, and be more satisfied with a small, dedicated fan base versus a robust, large, outstretched fan base. I see a lot of guys that are aiming for, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars via crowdfunding. What I personally want is to get to a place where I have 1,000 dedicated fans, where every year I can get them to spend $100 with me, and that's good. Then I'm solid. And I think the more creators that can do that, the more sustainable the industry will be overall.
Yeah, that's like the saying the riches are in the niches rather than trying to like be the Coca-Cola of
Yes, yes,
comics and
yes.
appeal to everyone. That, like you said, identifying your target fan base and hyper
Mhm.
serving them, as you said, sounds to be like it's the wave of the future.
I think so. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's kind of like a retreat. And yes, it is. But it's a retreat that is, by design, built to safeguard what we've got so that we don't stretch too far and it collapses. That's really the biggest thing. Is I think we're at a risk now of things stretching so far that they collapse. We're seeing people that are creating with the interest of getting movies made out of their stories, not necessarily making comics.
Right.
And that becomes a problem because your authenticity isn't there, and it maybe you do get a big lump sum of money, But then what do you do with that? You don't come back into the business. You don't reinvest in the business. You take your money, you go into, oh, I'm going to write this new movie. You're not really interested in comics. It was just a hop skip for you. And that's dangerous for us as well.
Right, right. So, what are the challenges of being an independent writer and publisher as opposed to just going for the mainstream, Marvel, DC kind of companies?
Man, it's funny that you asked me this where I'm at. So I'm out at Rosemont, Illinois for Fan Expo Chicago, and 22 years ago was the first time I ever came to this show when it was under the umbrella of Wizard World. And I remember being of the mindset that I did not want to be the guy who was standing in line trying to show my work to Marvel and DC editor, hoping that I'm good enough that they would hire me for anything. I determined back then that the smartest way to play this game, and I always looked at it as a game, was I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to do something independent, and I will show that to an editor or somebody like that. And maybe it works for them, maybe it doesn't. It gets me onto a bigger platform. If it doesn't work for them, well, that's cool. I will stay back here and I will keep selling this until the sales numbers alone make them have to pay attention to what I'm doing, or the output makes them have to pay attention to what I'm doing. One way or the other, I will be put on their radar, but through my determination or my own means, on my own terms. And to that, what I can honestly say is that there is a sincere lack of experience on my part with trying to get into more mainstream places. I specifically tried to avoid it. And on one hand, that was a safeguard for me personally. My ego, however you want to look at it, I wanted more control of what my creative output was going to be, and the best way for me to have that is independently. Um, so, on one hand, I can see that lack of experience is, it's a limitation on my part. However, what I can also say is, despite not working for Marvel, DC, Image, or Dark Horse, most mainstream creators today know who I am because I put forth the effort and the work to make sure that, despite the fact that I don't have those accolades or those accreditations, they still saw me hustling, grinding, doing this work, and being in a space where I was shoulder to shoulder with them. And so I think that there's a freedom to being independent, and I don't know that everyone understands exactly what that means, because obviously there's a lot of responsibility within that. But that power is huge. I can make whatever I want to make, when I want to make it, how I want to make it, and as long as I can figure out my own determined path of success, I can keep that going. And that's kind of what I think is the best part of this equation for me is I don't want to just be an innovator in what I've created. I want to be an innovator with how I've done it. And so you can't do that if you work for the mainstream. The mainstream is mainstream because they have a process that you kind of plug into and you ride that wave until they say you can't. And I never wanted to be that guy.
So it sounds like you just kind of carved out a lane for yourself. Was that intentionally, or was that kind of through trial and error?
A little bit of both,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
I had this idea for the longest time that I would work for someone and do what I could to make them big. And then once my name had that kind of pop behind it, then I would launch my own thing and ride that wave.
Okay.
And along the way, I realized, why does it have to be someone else's stuff that I build off of? Why can't it just literally be mine?
Hmm.
And that was an ongoing process. I still regularly look back on the things that I've done or have thought about doing and reevaluate the effectiveness of it because this whole journey of creativity is an evolving process. There's no point, despite all the things that I feel like I've accomplished or other people have noted that I've accomplished, that I would say that I haven't. So it's always an ongoing, transitional kind of space that I like to live in.
Cool. So what projects are you working on right now?
Still glad you asked that. I currently have a week left of an amazing Kickstarter campaign, even though I just talked about Kickstarter. So it's these two books here, which are prose books featuring characters that I co-created with my buddy Justin Castaneda, called the Kindergartens. And again, this is kind of in this whole, develop your own lane, carve your own system sort of setup where we decided that we were going to make books that you could grow from, right? So we had the Kindergartens, wonderful comic series called Wonder Care Presents the Kindergartens. That is an all ages friendly title. Under my imprint, Vantage In-House, one of the things that I wanted was to have different readership groups where you could find something that you wanted to read no matter how old you were. So we have all ages, we have teen, we have young adult, we have mature. But then once we had that, it was like, okay, well, how else do we build the next generation of readers? Specifically, the Kindergartens book or comic series was written to be more conversational than early reader friendly. So we go back to the well last year after San Diego Comic Con, and I pitched to Justin. I said, well, what if we do some stories or take some of our previous work and do adaptations that are early reader or high low, books that's high interest, low readability. And for this particular book, this is an adaptation of our first issue, How Far Is Up. And with this, what we're able to do is we can start an earlier fan base. We can go into schools and have this book, and it serves a K through 2, grade point. And once we feel like the students are ready, or the parents feel like the students are ready, they can get introduced to the individual comic, and it's a different reading experience for them. They still now are familiar with the story, but now they get a different, insight with the experience of reading it through comics, because the visual narrative structure of sequential art is different than just your traditional books. So we are actively building the next generation of readers with this project. And that's kind of my next big focal point is, how do I get people reading things, even if they don't realize like the benefit and growth structure of what they're reading? I'm a kid of the South Side, and there are no comic shops on the South Side. So that means that there's a whole, group of kids, schools that are not being served with this kind of material. And here's an opportunity for me to, bring this material to them, and then see the bigger benefits educationally for them. And so it's really just kind of building on that idea is what I want to do. That's my biggest project right now.
So how did you come up with that idea? Was it just because you saw this need, as you were saying, of trying to
Yeah,
develop the next generation of readers?
absolutely. I mean, it's basically kind of looking at myself, right? I think we're our first models for anything, and being that I was the kid who had didn't really have difficulties reading, but I didn't have validation in my interest of reading, and so for the last almost 15 years, kind of part and parcel with my publishing imprint, I've had a project called You Create Comics, where I go into schools with workshops and enrichment opportunities for kids using comic books to kind of build up their creative expression, sense of communication, creativity, and collaborative skills. So this kind of fits, all of those things and puts them together in another, package or venue for what it is that I want to use as impact. So yeah, definitely seeing kids out there where they don't necessarily see. I don't necessarily like the concept of they don't see themselves
Hmm.
in things. It's more of they don't see that they can create these things, and that's really kind of more of where I come into play with this. I want them to see that they could create this and keep moving from there. The motto from You Create Comics is kids who create comics read comics, and kids who read comics can read anything. So it's really just kind of building a structure that introduces them to material that they'll be interested in, that they can ride with for a long time.
So when you do workshops, what kinds of tools do you use to encourage it? Like, do you tell them, like, physically draw with pencil and paper, or,
Mm-hmm.
write out manually, or do you use digital tools, or what kind of
I
instruments?
love I love pencil and paper, man. Like
Okay.
I'm an old school guy like that. So yeah, we came up with a series of workbooks, different tools like that. I started with a workbook called the Character Crafter, and it's designed to kind of use inspiration from mainstream characters, but have you make your very own. And by doing so, now you're suddenly a comic creator. And in truth, not only you're a comic creator, you're an IP holder. You're already in a position where if you, pursue this long term, you have a property that is yours that you could explore other aspects and venues, media, things like that. But it's kind of more so about, hey, you've created something that is totally up to you. You are fully in control. Yes, there might be parameters, but that's more of a challenge than anything. It's can you create something fun within these rules? And that's been a great project for me, both in terms of my community building as well as just kind of awareness of who I am as a creative.
What kind of response do you get from children? Because a lot of children, like they're in front of a screen from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, and some of them may not be used to having actual physical, tangible paper and pencils and stuff to work with. I would outside of,
So true.
schoolwork. Yeah.
So true. And in that regard, like I lean into the tangible aspect of it, but I still have to respect the fact that, again, in terms of the digital, that is a very true aspect of things. So to kind of, I don't even want to say combat, that's not even the right word, to utilize that tendency, I created another format of books. This is a book series format that I call Cardables. And essentially, it's a trading card, and on the backside is a QR code that allows you to scan it and get free access into what the book is. And the idea for me is recognizing, again, most kids aren't going to comic shops. If they do go to comic shops, there's this veil or halo of high value, and so they're not really encouraged to treat them as commodities. You can't just roll up a book anymore and put it in your back pocket and share it with your friend like you used to do back in the day. That would be like, oh my God, you're damaging the book. I don't want people to be precious about these things. I want them to enjoy them, I want them to experience it. So knowing that kids are with their phones, they've got a screen, they scan a QR code, they've got a book that's now downloaded on there, and they can share this with a friend. They can give it to somebody. And it's low cost, high yield to me as a creator. So if they lose it, it's not that bad of an investment thing. I can give another one. Like that's nothing, in the scale of things. And just kind of having that constant source of feeding creativity, I think, is super important. So it's an interesting sort of balance. You have to kind of look at all parts of it and find value in all of it. You can't go, well, I really don't like this side, so I don't want to feed it. No, figure out how you can use it because that's already got a fan base built into it. Tap in.
That's really innovative using QR
Thank
codes
you.
because, yeah, I'm sure kids are used to seeing those and know how to use them. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what other publishing projects have you worked on? Because you've published books as well, right?
Yes. So through my imprint, Vantage In House, we started off with a number of different comic book series. So we had The Samaritan, which was our very first one, a more
Mhm.
mature title.
Mhm.
But I wanted to really kind of expand into things. So looking at why I called it Vantage In House Productions as opposed to Vantage In House Comics was so that I can make more stuff,
Okay.
not just comics. So in 2012, I published my first prose novella called 8 Minutes, which is such an interesting sort of like to look back on what 8 minutes is and was is kind of interesting because it was an idea that I had like in high school. And the concept was if the sun were to blow up, we wouldn't know for 8 minutes.
Wow.
The act of the actual explosion visually, we wouldn't see it until that those light particles hit us, and it takes 8 minutes for that to happen. But by the time that those light particles hit us, the sun energy is like right behind it as well. So it's kind of like it's 15 short vignette stories, and quite frankly, like spoiler, at the end of each story, the Earth gets destroyed. But the idea isn't like morbid; it's more about how do we find beauty and appreciation in the mundane things
Hmm.
that we do all the time that we don't pay any attention to. If this was the last time that we were going to have a conversation and these last 8 minutes was it, how important would those 8 minutes be to us? It would be huge. Whether we knew it or not, it would be big. And so where it just started as this kind of sci-fi story, it became somewhat of an inspirational sort of thing in its creation or execution. And it's crazy to think that it came out in 2012. So more than 10 years ago, I had this pseudo self-help book that was really about take your time, appreciate every little thing that you do because you never know when your last 8 minutes are going to happen.
In the next episode, we'll pick up with part two of my conversation with Victor. We'll go further into the life of an independent Black creative in the comic book space and talk about the pros and cons of using AI in the creative process. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to my channel.